Imagine this. You're sitting on a crowded bus, your eyes lazily scanning the world outside the window. The city moves like a blur, life unfolding in slow motion, until you hear a voice, sharp, demanding, and full of entitlement. You glance up, only to witness a scene that stirs a deep, unsettling feeling within you. A young kid, not more than 16 or 17, is sitting in a seat that could easily fit two. And right in front of him, an elderly man stands, his knees buckling under the weight of his age, holding on to the overhead rail with trembling hands. The bus jerks forward, but still, the young boy doesn't budge. Instead, he shifts slightly, his eyes locked on his phone, completely oblivious to the older man struggling just a few feet away. For a moment, you wonder if you should step in. But the situation only gets worse. The elderly man, who's clearly been standing for far too long, lets out a soft sigh, his gaze flickering between the seat and the boy, a silent plea for help. It's clear he's hoping the kid will be decent enough to offer him a place to sit. But the kid's body language speaks volumes. He's not moving. He's not even acknowledging the presence of the elderly man in front of him. And, in that moment, you feel something inside you snap. This isn't just about a seat. It's about respect, about empathy, and about the basic decency we owe to one another, especially to the elderly. But here's where things get interesting, and trust me, you're not going to expect what happens next. As you sit there, observing the tension slowly building in the air, a woman, maybe in her mid-40s, sitting just behind the kid, suddenly shifts her posture. Her eyes narrow as she watches the scene unfold, her jaw tightening with frustration. And then, without warning, she does something that completely changes the course of this encounter. Her response is swift, calculated, and incredibly satisfying. In an instant, the situation transforms from an uncomfortable standoff to a moment of undeniable justice. But how she handles it, and what happens in the aftermath, is something that will leave you questioning the power of one person's intervention. You see, it's not just about what she does. It's about the way her actions ripple through the people around her, shaking the entire bus out of its indifference. I know you're wondering, what exactly does this woman do? What kind of reaction can turn such a tense moment into something so powerful? What was the tipping point that finally made her snap? Well, that's exactly what I'm about to reveal. But I want you to do something for me right now. Stop and think for a moment about your own values, about the things that make you who you are. How would you have reacted in that same situation? Would you have done something different? Would you have taken a stand or quietly stayed in your seat? You see, the reason I'm asking you this is simple. This story is not just about a bus ride. It's about a larger, much deeper reflection of our society. It's about how we treat others, especially those who are vulnerable. And it's about the moment when one person decides enough is enough and refuses to stand by while others suffer. Now, before I go any further, let's pause and reflect. You're here because you want to know what happens next, right? You want to know exactly how this woman steps up to the plate and makes her move. And believe me, you don't want to miss it. The payoff is going to be so much more than just a simple act of kindness. It's going to make you think twice about your own actions, your own choices in life, and your own sense of justice. So, let's dive deeper into the moment. Picture yourself back on that bus. The air feels thick, tense, and a little uncomfortable as the elderly man continues to stand, his exhaustion written all over his face. The kid shifts again, his gaze never leaving his phone. You can see the frustration mounting in the woman behind him, her patience running thin. The seconds feel like minutes, and you can almost feel the collective breath of the people around you, holding on to the edge of their seats, waiting for something to happen. And then, as if someone flicked a switch, the woman leans forward. She taps the kid on the shoulder, her voice calm but firm as she speaks. What she says next will make you want to jump out of your seat and cheer. But the real question is, what will the kid do? Will he apologize? Will he finally offer his seat to the elderly man? Or will he double down, forcing the situation to escalate even further? Trust me, you're not going to see this one coming. What happens next is more than just a simple act of good Samaritanism. It's a moment that proves that sometimes Standing up for what's right requires more than just words. It requires action. And that action, my friends, has the power to change everything. But there's a twist. Because as satisfying as it is to see the young kid face the consequences of his selfishness, there's an even bigger lesson that's about to unfold. Something much deeper than just the seat. Something that could change the way you look at the world. Now, I know you're on the edge of your seat, itching to know how this all plays out. But trust me, the most important part of this story is yet to come. You won't believe what happens when the woman steps into the situation. It's a game changer, and I guarantee you'll be talking about it long after the video ends. So, stay with me, because you won't want to miss the moment when the woman's actions turn everything upside down. You've come this far, so don't click away. The payoff is just around the corner, and it's going to be more than worth it. You'll have the answer to that burning question. What happens when one person decides they're no longer willing to stand by and watch injustice unfold? Stick around, and let's find out together. The woman sitting behind the kid wasn't just an ordinary passenger on that bus. Her name was Linda, and she had lived through things most people would only read about in books or see in movies. She had faced more than her fair share of challenges, struggles, and heartbreak, but through it all, one thing had remained constant in her life: her belief in standing up for others. You see, Linda wasn't the type of person to ignore an injustice, no matter how small it seemed. And as she watched the young boy refuse to offer his seat to the elderly man, her mind began to race, not just with frustration, but with something far deeper, a haunting sense of déjà vu. Not long before this incident, Linda had been through an incredibly difficult year. She had recently lost her job, a position she had worked tirelessly for over 2 decades. She had always prided herself on her work ethic, her ability to put others first, and her drive to make the world a better place, even in small ways. But when her company downsized, she was left with nothing but the sting of rejection. The feeling of being overlooked, dismissed, and forgotten was something she hadn't truly understood until it happened to her. In a way, she could relate to the elderly man standing in front of the young kid. It was that same feeling of being invisible, ignored, and not worth the effort that struck her in that moment. And as much as she hated to admit it, there was something inside her that refused to sit idly by and watch another person endure that same indignity. Linda's own struggles had made her more attuned to the world around her, especially the subtle ways people treated each other. She noticed the way the bus driver barely acknowledged the elderly man when he boarded, offering him no smile or kind word. She saw how other passengers glanced away when the man stood in front of them, eyes fixed on the windows or buried in their phones. It wasn't a one-time thing. She had seen it before. People who were too consumed with their own lives to notice the quiet suffering of others. And in that moment, Linda knew she couldn't just watch from the sidelines anymore. She had spent far too long doing that in her own life, standing by while opportunities slipped away, watching as people around her made decisions that hurt others. But the kid, the one who refused to move, he was different. She could tell by his body language. He wasn't oblivious like the others. No, this was deliberate. He knew exactly what he was doing. The way he clutched his phone, the way he turned his head just enough to avoid eye contact with the man, it was a clear sign of someone who had been raised to think that their needs were more important than anyone else's. He had no respect for the elderly man, no understanding of the struggle it took to just be able to stand on your own 2 feet at that age. And Linda's frustration grew as she realized how many others like him were out there, kids who had been raised in an environment that valued selfishness over compassion, entitlement over empathy. The thought made her blood boil, but it was also a harsh reminder of the world she had become so disillusioned with. But here's where it gets interesting. As Linda prepared to make her move, to finally confront the kid and take a stand for the elderly man, something unexpected happened. The elderly man, who had been standing with what seemed like all the strength he could muster, suddenly made a strange motion. He began to sway, his hand tightening around the overhead rail as if he were about to lose his balance. Linda's heart skipped a beat. For a moment, she thought he might fall, and she braced herself to jump up and help him, but just as quickly as it started, he steadied himself. The movement was so quick, so subtle, that no one else seemed to notice. But Linda saw it, and it unsettled her in ways she couldn't explain. What was that? Was he faking it to get sympathy? Linda couldn't be sure. The elderly man's expression hadn't changed. He still looked exhausted, still struggling to hold himself together. But the sudden, almost imperceptible motion seemed too out of place, too deliberate. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this man than met the eye. And in that moment, Linda wasn't sure if she was the one who needed to act, or if someone else had already set something into motion that she didn't fully understand. Could it be possible that this elderly man was playing a part in something bigger? Something more calculated? As the seconds passed, Linda's mind began to race. Could the elderly man be connected to something more than just this bus ride? Was there a deeper story here? Maybe the kid wasn't the only one hiding something. What if the elderly man was in on something, maybe a con or a scam that no one was aware of? The thought lingered in Linda's mind, swirling around her thoughts, making her second-guess the entire situation. Could the kid actually be the victim here? Or was Linda about to make a huge mistake by intervening? Her thoughts were interrupted as the elderly man caught her eye. For just a brief moment, their gazes met, and Linda's stomach dropped. There was something in his eyes, something dark, something that suggested he knew exactly what she was thinking. It was a look of recognition, like he was aware that Linda had started to question everything. But what did that mean? Was this just her imagination running wild, or was there something deeper at play? The more she tried to make sense of the situation, the more questions she had. And then, as if the universe itself was playing a game of chess, the kid glanced up from his phone, catching Linda's eye. He didn't seem surprised or scared. No, his expression was almost amused, as if he had anticipated her move. He wasn't just a teenager who didn't know better. He was playing a game, and Linda was just another piece on the board. The kid's smug look told Linda everything she needed to know. He had planned this moment. Everything about this encounter felt manipulated, choreographed even. Linda had just stepped into a much bigger story than she ever could have imagined. And now, the question wasn't just whether or not the kid would give up his seat. No, the real question was, what had she walked into? What was the truth hiding behind the seats of this bus, behind the faces of these strangers? Linda's thoughts were racing, each question more pressing than the last. She had no idea what she was dealing with. The elderly man's strange behavior, the kid's cocky expression, nothing was as it seemed. But just as she was about to act, something unexpected happened. The bus made a sharp turn, jerking Linda in her seat, and when she looked back at the elderly man, he was gone. The seat where he had been standing was now empty. Her heart skipped a beat. Had he exited the bus? She hadn't noticed him leave, but then again, in the chaos of her thoughts, how could she have? It was as if he had vanished into thin air, leaving no trace behind. Linda's stomach twisted. Had this been some sort of setup, or had she missed something crucial in the moment? She quickly glanced around, scanning the bus for any sign of the man, but there was nothing. The other passengers remained engrossed in their own worlds, completely unaware of what had just happened. The situation, which had seemed so straightforward just moments before, was now spiraling into something far more complicated. A sudden voice from behind startled Linda, pulling her from her thoughts. It was the woman sitting across from her, someone she hadn't noticed before. She had been silently observing the whole situation, but now she leaned forward, her voice low and almost conspiratorial. "You should leave it alone, Han. Just let it go," she said, her eyes flicking to the empty space where the elderly man had stood moments ago. There was something off about her tone, something that made Linda's instincts flare. Why was this stranger speaking to her like that? Why was she so eager to have Linda drop the issue? It didn't sit right with Linda, but she played it cool, nodding politely without responding. Yet in the back of her mind, she couldn't help but feel that this woman knew more than she was letting on. Maybe she was just trying to protect Linda from getting involved in something dangerous, or maybe there was something more sinister at play here. Either way, Linda wasn't about to drop the case. As the bus made its way through the city streets, Linda's unease grew. She reached for her phone, hoping to track down any trace of the elderly man, or at least find some sort of clue that would explain his disappearance. But when she checked her screen, she noticed something odd. The video she had filmed earlier, a quick clip of the kid refusing to give up his seat, was gone. Deleted. She couldn't believe it. The footage had been there just minutes ago, but now it was wiped clean, as if it had never existed. Her fingers trembled as she checked the rest of her gallery, but there was no trace of it. It wasn't just the video that had disappeared. It felt as if someone had wiped away any evidence that something unusual had even happened. Linda felt a chill run down her spine. Had someone been monitoring her? Had the kid noticed her recording and somehow erased it from her phone? The idea seemed far-fetched, but the more she thought about it, the more it made sense. The kid had been far too aware of his surroundings, and it wasn't the first time he had locked eyes with her in that strange, knowing way. The thought of someone having access to her phone was unsettling enough, but as Linda looked around the bus again, she saw something that made her blood run cold. The woman who had warned her to leave it alone, she was gone. Just as mysteriously as the elderly man, she had vanished without a trace. No one had seen her leave, and Linda couldn't even remember exactly when the woman had disappeared. Had she been part of the whole thing, or was she just a bystander caught in the wrong place at the wrong time? The feeling of being watched, of having her every move observed, intensified. Linda tried to steady her breathing, reminding herself that this was just a coincidence. But deep down, she knew something was wrong. The pieces weren't fitting together, and the more she tried to dig, the deeper the mystery seemed to go. As the bus neared her stop, Linda hesitated, unsure of whether to get off or stay. Her gut told her that she wasn't done with this yet. But what if she was wrong? What if digging deeper only put her in danger? She glanced once more at the kid, who was still sitting in his seat, scrolling through his phone as if nothing had happened. His face had become unreadable, his expression no longer smug, but somehow guarded. And there was something else. Just as Linda turned to leave, she saw the kid glance up at her one more time. This time, his eyes weren't just casual or dismissive. They were cold, calculating, like he had been waiting for her to make her move all along. Before Linda could react, the bus doors opened, and a figure stepped onto the bus, a tall man in a dark coat, his face partially obscured by a hat. He moved with purpose, but it was the way he scanned the interior of the bus that caught Linda's attention. His eyes didn't miss a single passenger, and when they locked onto Linda, she felt an uncomfortable sensation ripple through her. He wasn't just looking at her. He was sizing her up. It was the same way the kid had looked at her earlier, but this man's gaze was far more intense, far more calculating. Linda's heart pounded as she quickly moved to exit the bus, her mind spinning with questions. Who was this man? Why had he just boarded the bus? And what did he know about the elderly man, or the kid, or the woman who had warned her? Was there a connection she hadn't uncovered yet? And just as Linda's foot hit the sidewalk, the bus doors slammed shut behind her, the engine roaring to life. She turned around to glance at the bus one last time, but when she did, the windows were all fogged up, and she couldn't see inside. That's when it hit her. The last piece of the puzzle had slipped away. The man, the kid, the woman, they were all connected somehow. But how? And what were they hiding? Linda knew she couldn't walk away now, not when the answers were so close. But what if the truth was more dangerous than she ever could have imagined? In that moment, as the bus disappeared into the distance, Linda made a decision. She wasn't going to stop. But she also knew one thing for sure. Someone, somewhere, didn't want her to find out what was really going on. And now she had to figure out who and why. The deeper she dug, the more obstacles appeared, and the more she realized just how far this tangled web stretched. But the biggest question of all remained unanswered. Was Linda just another pawn in someone else's game, or was she finally about to uncover something that would change everything? The clock was ticking, and the truth was getting harder to find. Linda's heart was still pounding as she stepped away from the bus stop, the cold air hitting her like a splash of water. Her mind was in overdrive, replaying every second of the past few hours, trying to piece together a puzzle that seemed to be changing every time she thought she had a grasp on it. The more she tried to understand, the more questions piled up. It wasn't just the strange disappearance of the elderly man, or the bizarre behavior of the kid and the mysterious woman. Something bigger was at play, and she was starting to feel like she was the one being played. But as Linda walked down the street, her phone buzzed in her pocket, dragging her back to reality. She pulled it out, half expecting another cryptic message or a strange alert, but what she saw took her completely by surprise. It was a text from her brother, Mark, someone she hadn't spoken to in weeks. Their relationship had always been strained, the distance between them growing over the years as they both moved on with their lives, each consumed by their own problems. But Mark's message was different this time. It was short, cryptic, and left Linda with an unsettling feeling in the pit of her stomach. Stay out of this. It's bigger than you think. Don't dig any deeper. At first, Linda stared at the screen in disbelief. Why was Mark sending her a warning like this, and what did he mean by "it's bigger than you think"? It didn't make sense. She hadn't even mentioned her investigation into the bus incident to him, so how could he know anything about it? And why would he be so adamant about her staying out of it? She felt a cold shiver run down her spine. Mark had always been the more secretive one, the type to keep things to himself, but this was different. This wasn't a casual comment. It was a direct, urgent plea for her to back off. And something about it felt wrong. Linda knew she had to respond, to get some clarity, but she didn't. Instead, she pocketed her phone, the feeling of being watched creeping back into her thoughts. Linda had always trusted her brother, despite their differences. They had grown up together in a small, quiet neighborhood, and there was a time when they were close, a time when she would have shared everything with him. But those days were long gone. Now, she was left wondering what Mark knew, and why he didn't want her involved in whatever it was that seemed to be unraveling before her. It was becoming clear that the pieces of this puzzle were connected not just to her, but to everyone around her. She wasn't the only one who had been drawn into something that was much bigger than she had ever imagined. As the days went on, Linda couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, that her every move was being tracked. She started to receive more strange messages, not just from Mark, but from unknown numbers, messages that seemed to be guiding her, steering her in a direction she wasn't ready to go. They were cryptic, almost haunting in their vagueness, but they all seemed to lead to one thing: the bus incident. It was like someone knew what she was up to, like they were trying to pull her deeper into this dark web. The more she dug, the more these messages came, some threatening, others just unsettling. One read, "Stop now, or you'll regret it." Another said, "The truth is buried in places you can't see." Each time, Linda tried to block the numbers, but the messages kept coming. They weren't random. They were part of a carefully constructed plan to keep her in the dark, to steer her away from uncovering something that had been hidden for far too long. The more Linda thought about it, the more she realized just how interconnected everything was. And just when she thought she was finally starting to get some clarity, things took another strange turn. One night, while she was sifting through the messages and trying to piece together what had happened on the bus, she received a call from her old friend, Sarah. Sarah was someone Linda hadn't spoken to in years, a friend from her college days who had disappeared from her life without a trace. The two of them had been close, sharing everything, until Sarah abruptly cut ties, leaving Linda confused and hurt. But now she was calling. When Linda answered, Sarah's voice was shaky, her words almost too quiet to hear. "I know what you're looking into, Linda, and I need you to stop." "You have no idea what you're getting into," Sarah said, her voice tense with fear. Linda felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. "What are you talking about?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady, but it was clear something wasn't right. Sarah hesitated for a moment and then whispered, "I can't explain it over the phone. But trust me, you're in danger. You need to walk away. Now." Before Linda could ask any more questions, the call abruptly ended, leaving her with nothing but silence and a growing sense of dread. What was Sarah so afraid of? And why was she warning Linda now, after all this time? The fact that Sarah, someone who had distanced herself from Linda so completely, was now reaching out with such urgency only added to the confusion. Was Sarah involved in this somehow, Or was she just another person being dragged into this twisted situation? The next morning, Linda found something on her doorstep, a small, crumpled piece of paper. No name, no address, just a single line written in sharp, jagged handwriting. The answers you seek aren't where you think they are. The note was chilling, its simplicity making it all the more unsettling. It was like someone was toying with her, pulling her in with every new clue, only to leave her grasping at shadows. The further Linda pushed, the more she realized that every lead she followed only seemed to take her in circles, back to square one. And then it happened. A new lead emerged, something that seemed to contradict everything Linda thought she knew. A video surfaced online, a shaky, low-quality clip of a bus ride, taken from what looked like a hidden camera. It wasn't much, but there, in the corner of the frame, was the elderly man from the bus, but he wasn't standing alone. He was talking to someone. Someone wearing the same dark coat as the man who had boarded the bus earlier. The man in the coat was standing close to the elderly man, speaking to him in hushed tones, his face partially obscured, just like the man Linda had seen on the bus. This video, this new piece of evidence, was something Linda hadn't seen coming, and it made everything she thought she knew feel like it was slipping through her fingers. Who was the man in the coat? And why had the elderly man been talking to him? What was their connection? And how did it fit into the bigger puzzle Linda was trying to solve? The video left more questions than answers, and as Linda watched it over and over, she realized that she was no closer to understanding the truth than she had been when she first boarded that bus. Every answer only seemed to lead to more uncertainty, and every clue felt like it was pushing her deeper into a world she wasn't ready to enter. The stakes were higher now, and Linda knew that she couldn't back out. But who could she trust? Who was manipulating the truth, and who was telling it? The deeper she went, the more tangled the web became, and Linda was beginning to wonder just how far she was willing to go to uncover the answers, and what she might lose in the process. Linda couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. At first, it was just a slight unease, a nagging sensation in the back of her mind that told her something wasn't right. But as the days went on, the feeling grew stronger, more palpable, until it was all she could think about. It wasn't just the strange phone calls, the cryptic messages, or the people who seemed to vanish without a trace. It was the fact that every time she turned a corner or glanced over her shoulder, she felt as though someone or something was lurking just out of sight, waiting for her to make a mistake. It started small. One evening, while walking home from work, Linda noticed a dark car parked across the street from her apartment. It had been there when she left, and it was still there when she returned. The headlights dim but unmistakable. She tried to tell herself it was just a coincidence. Maybe it was someone else's car. But the more she looked at it, the more she realized it wasn't just sitting there. It was watching. The driver was never visible, but the car was always in the same spot, never moving. It was like a silent sentinel, observing her every move. The first few nights, she didn't let it bother her. But after a week of the same unsettling pattern, Linda knew something wasn't right. Someone was following her. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stood frozen in her apartment doorway, staring at the car parked in the shadows. She tried to convince herself she was being paranoid, that there had to be an innocent explanation. But deep down, she couldn't shake the fear that something far more dangerous was lurking just beyond her reach. She hadn't told anyone about her investigation, not even Mark or Sarah. She couldn't afford to involve them. But now, she was beginning to realize that she had no choice. This wasn't something she could handle on her own anymore. That night, she didn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside, set her on edge. She had to know if she was being followed, had to know who was behind all of this. So, when the sun began to rise, Linda took a risk. She left her apartment quietly, slipping out the back door to avoid the car that had been stationed across the street. Her heart hammered in her chest as she moved quickly down the alley, staying in the shadows as best as she could. She didn't dare look behind her, but the feeling of being watched never left her. Her every step felt like it echoed in the silence, as if the world itself was holding its breath. She reached the corner and peeked around it, trying to see if the car was still there. And there it was. But this time, something was different. The car had moved, but only a few feet. It was now parked directly in front of her building, its headlights glaring in the early morning light. Linda felt her stomach twist. They knew where she lived. They knew where she was going. And they had been waiting. She quickly stepped back into the shadows, heart pounding in her throat. The next few days were a blur of paranoia and fear. Every time she left her apartment, she felt the presence of that car lurking in the distance. She couldn't outrun it. She couldn't hide from it. It was always there, just beyond the corner of her eye. She tried to go about her day, tried to keep her mind off the growing sense of dread that was taking over her every thought. But it wasn't working. The truth was closing in on her, and she had no idea who was pulling the strings. But things got worse. Much worse. One evening, after she had just returned from work, she found her apartment door cracked open. At first, she thought it was her imagination playing tricks on her. Maybe she had left it open by accident. But as she stepped inside, she immediately knew something was wrong. The air was thick with the scent of something unfamiliar, something metallic, and her heart skipped a beat when she noticed the small, barely noticeable scratch on the doorframe, as if someone had forced their way inside. The apartment was a mess. Drawers had been pulled open, books and papers scattered across the floor. Her belongings were rifled through, but nothing seemed to be missing. Everything appeared to be in its place, except for one thing, her laptop. It was gone. The one piece of equipment she had been using to document everything, every clue, every strange message, every piece of evidence she had gathered, was now missing. Linda's pulse quickened. Whoever had done this wasn't just trying to scare her. They were trying to stop her. She quickly scanned the room, her eyes darting across the wreckage, trying to find any clue that would explain why her apartment had been ransacked. But there was nothing. No note. No threatening message. Just chaos. She knew the situation had escalated, that whoever was behind this was not only watching her but actively trying to erase everything she had learned. She had to leave. But where could she go? Her apartment felt like a trap now, a place where someone could find her at any moment. With trembling hands, Linda grabbed her phone and tried to call Sarah. The phone rang several times before going to voicemail. She left a frantic message, urging Sarah to get in touch. She then tried Mark, but his number was disconnected. Panic set in as she realized she was more alone than ever before. She had no idea who to trust, and the people who had once been close to her were now unreachable. As Linda gathered what little she could, she heard a knock on the door. Soft at first, but then more insistent. Her heart raced as she froze, not knowing what to do. Was it the person who had ransacked her apartment? Was it someone trying to finish what they had started? She wasn't about to open the door and find out. Instead, she crouched low, her breathing shallow, as she peeked through the peephole. The person on the other side was tall, their face hidden in shadow. They stood there, unmoving, for what felt like an eternity. And then, just as quickly as they had arrived, the knock stopped. Linda's body tensed, but no further sounds came. She waited, barely daring to breathe, until she felt sure the person had left. But she knew this was just the beginning. Whoever was after her was closing in, and she had no idea how much longer she could keep running. The realization hit her like a cold wave. This wasn't just some random act. She was tangled in something much bigger, and the answers she sought were buried deep, somewhere dark and dangerous. The more she tried to uncover, the deeper the danger sank its claws into her. And the worst part? She still had no idea who was behind it all, or why they were so desperate to keep her from the truth. Linda's grip on the doorframe tightened as the realization slowly crept in. She had been looking at the whole situation the wrong way. Every instinct, every conclusion she had drawn about the mystery, the eerie messages, the disappearing acts, and the cryptic figures, it was all clouded by one massive oversight. For days, she had been consumed by the idea that someone, some shadowy figure, was pulling the strings, orchestrating her every move from a distance, toying with her. But the truth was, she had missed something vital all along. The signs had been there, hidden in plain sight, and it wasn't just her apartment that had been turned upside down. She had been blind to a far more dangerous game being played, one in which she wasn't the target, but a pawn. It was the text from her brother, Mark, that kept replaying in her head, haunting her. At first, it had seemed like an ominous warning. Stay out of this. It's bigger than you think. Don't dig any deeper. But now, after everything she had uncovered, after seeing how twisted everything had become, she began to see the message in a new light. She wasn't supposed to stop looking. She wasn't supposed to retreat. She was supposed to keep digging, because Mark wasn't warning her. He was trying to protect her from the truth he knew was coming. And now it felt like the walls were closing in. Linda had been so focused on the external forces, the strangers, the threats, the dark car outside her building, that she never questioned the possibility that the answer had been closer to her all along. She had been so desperate to find the one person who could give her answers, so fixated on figuring out who was following her, who was orchestrating the chaos, that she missed a critical part of the puzzle. Mark wasn't just a concerned brother. He wasn't just trying to warn her out of love. No, he had been involved from the very beginning, tangled in the same web, but hiding in plain sight. The moment the realization hit her, Linda froze. She had been meeting with Mark's old contacts, people she had trusted without thinking twice, trying to get closer to answers. They had seemed like allies, familiar faces who might hold the keys to solving the mystery. But now, it became clear. Mark's cryptic warning wasn't just a casual attempt to protect her, it was a silent admission of guilt. Mark had known exactly what was at stake. He had known what was coming, and he had kept it from her. As Linda sat there, alone in her apartment, the cold air creeping through the window, she remembered something strange that happened just days before the ransacking. It was subtle, almost too small to notice at the time, but now it stood out like a glaring red flag. When she'd last spoken to Mark on the phone, his voice had been strained, almost as if he was forcing himself to say the words, like he was hiding something, not just from Linda, but from everyone. And now, she was starting to piece it together. Her thoughts raced as she replayed every conversation, every interaction she'd had with him, and a pattern began to emerge, one she hadn't seen before. Mark had always been the one to keep things under wraps, the quiet, serious type who never shared too much. But what if that wasn't just his personality? What if his silence wasn't about protecting her, but about protecting something else entirely? Something he had been involved in, something he had never intended for Linda to uncover. In a flash, Linda's mind shifted from the idea of a faceless enemy to the grim possibility that the enemy had been standing right in front of her all along. She hadn't been dealing with random threats. This wasn't some bizarre coincidence that she was stumbling through. No, this was personal. The web she was caught in was far more intricate than she had ever imagined. Mark had been playing a role in this twisted scenario, perhaps even orchestrating it in ways Linda couldn't yet understand. Suddenly, the phone buzzed on the table in front of her. She glanced at it, heart pounding. It was a message from Mark, only it wasn't the usual cryptic warning. This one was different, far colder, far more direct. You're getting too close. You don't know what you're dealing with. Drop it, or you'll regret it. Linda's breath hitched, her hands trembling as she stared at the screen. For a moment, she wanted to call him back, to demand answers, to confront him, but something held her back. That message wasn't a warning. It was a threat. Mark wasn't trying to protect her anymore. He was trying to silence her. Her thoughts spiraled as the pieces of the puzzle started to fit together, but with every new realization came even more questions. What was Mark involved in? How far did this go? The messages, the threats, the strange people she had been encountering, they all seemed to be connected in a way she couldn't quite grasp, but the more she thought about it, the more she realized that Mark's involvement wasn't just accidental. He was a key player, and if Linda wasn't careful, she might end up as a pawn in a much darker game than she had ever imagined. Just as she was about to make a move, the doorbell rang. Linda's heart skipped a beat. She wasn't expecting anyone. With every muscle in her body tensed, she cautiously moved toward the door, wondering if this was the moment everything would spiral out of control. She peered through the peephole, but no one was there. Her pulse quickened. Had someone been standing just out of view? Was this another mind game? Or worse, was it Mark? Had he been watching her this entire time? Unable to take the uncertainty any longer, Linda opened the door, only to find nothing but a small, unmarked package on the ground. It was sealed tightly, with no indication of who had left it or why. Linda hesitated for a long moment before crouching down and picking it up. The package felt strangely heavy, almost as though it contained something far more important than it appeared. Her mind raced as she opened it slowly, carefully. Inside, she found an old, worn photograph. It was of her and Mark, taken years ago when they were both much younger. At first, Linda thought it was just a nostalgic keepsake, but there was something off about the photo. In the background, barely visible in the shadows, was a man she didn't recognize. Someone who had been there that day, standing in the background, just out of focus. It was as if someone had been watching them back then just as they were being watched now. Suddenly, Linda understood. The game had changed. Mark wasn't just trying to keep her safe. He was part of the very system she was trying to expose. And now, she had to decide whether she would continue down this dangerous path, uncovering more secrets, or if she would walk away before it was too late. But by now, Linda knew one thing for sure. There was no turning back. Linda sat frozen, the photograph still clutched tightly in her hand, her mind racing as she tried to piece together what it all meant. The man in the background, who she didn't recognize, had to be someone from Mark's past, someone who had been present in her life long before she even realized it. It felt like a punch to the gut. Mark had always kept things close to the chest, but this was a betrayal of a kind she couldn't fully grasp just yet. The revelation sent shockwaves through her, and with it came an unbearable weight. She knew she had to confront him. The longer she hesitated, the deeper she would sink into the chaos. But the thought of facing her own brother, the one person she had trusted above all others, made her stomach churn with doubt and fear. What if she was wrong? What if she had misread everything? What if Mark wasn't involved, but someone was simply trying to frame him, using their history to manipulate her emotions? The questions swirled in her mind, each one twisting the truth more than the last. But she couldn't live in this uncertainty. Not anymore. She had come too far, and the stakes were too high to back down now. The knock on her door shattered her thoughts. Linda's heart jumped in her chest as she stood up, the photograph now burning in her palm. She didn't move for a moment, her eyes glued to the door. Was it Mark? Or someone sent by him to keep her from digging deeper? Her fingers tightened around the edges of the door, that would cool against her sweaty palms. She took a deep breath and slowly approached, her mind screaming at her to prepare for whatever was waiting on the other side. When she opened it, the sight before her stopped her dead in her tracks. It wasn't Mark. It wasn't even anyone she knew. The woman standing before her was older, perhaps in her early 40s, her face tired, eyes sunken with a mix of fear and regret. She was holding a small envelope, its edges worn as though it had been carried around for days, maybe even weeks. The woman didn't speak at first. She just stared at Linda with an intensity that felt both familiar and chilling. Linda didn't know her, but there was something about the way she looked at her that sent a shiver up her spine. "Are you Linda?" the woman asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as though speaking too loudly might shatter something fragile. Linda nodded, her throat tight. "Who are you?" The woman hesitated, glancing down at the envelope in her hand, before finally speaking again. "I don't have much time," she said, her voice trembling. "You need to listen to me. Mark, he's in deeper than you think. Everything that's happened to you, all of this, it's been orchestrated. And you're walking straight into a trap." Linda's stomach twisted. "What are you talking about?" Without warning, the woman stepped forward, pushing the envelope into Linda's hands. "This is for you. It's from him." The words hung in the air like a threat, and Linda's pulse raced. She ripped the envelope open, her hands trembling as she pulled out a thick stack of papers. At first glance, it appeared to be financial documents, bank statements, transaction records, names, and companies she didn't recognize. But then, she saw the one name that stopped her cold. It was a list of aliases, and one of them was Mark's. Her mind spun as she flipped through the pages, every line revealing something new, something darker. Mark hadn't just been protecting her from the truth. He had been hiding it all along. Linda felt the weight of the documents in her hands like a death sentence. She had come to believe that Mark had been the one trying to protect her from the dangerous secrets they were all wrapped up in. But this was proof that Mark had been part of something much bigger, something far more sinister than she could have ever imagined. He wasn't just an unwilling participant. He had been a player. And now Linda was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down at the abyss. Before she could even process what she had just learned, the woman spoke again, her voice low and filled with urgency. "You have to choose, Linda. You can either run, go into hiding and leave all of this behind, or you can confront him. But if you confront him, it's not just Mark you'll be facing. You'll be facing a whole network of people who will stop at nothing to protect their secrets." Linda's chest tightened. The choice felt impossible. How could she walk away now, after everything she had uncovered? The truth was right in front of her, and it was the kind of truth that no one walked away from unscathed. But the thought of confronting Mark, of exposing everything, terrified her. What if it tore their family apart? What if it was too late? Mark had always been her protector, the one person she had trusted to keep her safe, and now she had to decide whether to tear that trust down. She glanced at the woman, whose eyes were filled with a quiet desperation. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman hesitated, her eyes flickering with something Linda couldn't place. Finally, she answered, "Because I was in your shoes once. I trusted him too. But Mark isn't who you think he is." Linda's heart dropped into her stomach. The implications of those words sank deep. Mark wasn't just a victim. He wasn't just a pawn in this game. He had been complicit. The trust she had placed in him now felt like a betrayal, one that left her shaken to the core. And yet, here she was, standing on the edge of a decision that could change everything. She wasn't just fighting for her own safety anymore. She was fighting for the truth that Mark had buried, the truth that could expose everything, if she had the courage to face it. The woman gave Linda one last look, a mix of pity and resolve in her eyes. "I can't tell you what to do, but you need to make up your mind. They're coming for you. And when they do, you'll have to decide if you're ready to face the consequences." As the woman turned to leave, Linda felt a cold rush of panic grip her heart. She couldn't let this slip away, not now. But as she looked at the envelope, at the damning documents, she knew she was about to walk into the lion's den. She was no longer just a bystander. She was in this for better or for worse. But which path would she choose? Run and save herself, or face the truth, no matter the cost? Linda's mind screamed at her to make a decision, but deep down, she knew that whatever she chose, there would be no going back. Not now. Not ever. Linda's pulse raced as she stood there, the weight of the envelope still in her hands, her mind reeling from the woman's cryptic warning. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in on her with every passing second. Her thoughts were a jumble of confusion and dread, the questions gnawing at her, digging deeper with every breath. She couldn't escape this, not anymore. The moment she took a step forward, she would be thrust into something far larger than anything she had ever imagined, something far more dangerous than she ever thought possible. But even with that knowledge, she couldn't walk away. The truth was right in front of her, and it was suffocating her. She had to uncover it, no matter the cost. As she stood frozen in place, the phone in her pocket buzzed. Linda's heart skipped a beat, and she fumbled to pull it out, her hands shaking. It was a text from Mark. His name on the screen felt like an anchor pulling her deeper into the storm. The message was short, but its implications were terrifying. "I know what you're doing. Stop before it's too late." Her breath caught in her throat, her grip tightening on the phone. This wasn't a warning. It was a threat. Mark knew she was close to uncovering the truth. But how? Had he been watching her this whole time, waiting for her to make a move? Or had someone else tipped him off? The questions exploded in her mind, each one feeding the growing panic in her chest. Mark had always been protective, but now it felt like he was trying to control her. Trying to stop her from learning the truth, from exposing the web of lies he had been a part of for so long. Before she could even process what she had just read, her phone buzzed again, this time with a call. It was a number she didn't recognize, but something in her gut told her to answer it. She swiped to accept the call, her heart hammering in her ears. "Linda," a voice said, low and urgent. It was a man's voice, one she hadn't heard before, but there was something chillingly familiar about it. "You don't know me, but I know you. I'm the one who's been trying to warn you." Linda's mind raced. "What do you want?" The voice on the other end paused for a moment, as if weighing his words. "What you're looking into, it's bigger than you think. It's not just Mark, not just your family. There are people in places you can't even imagine, and they'll do whatever it takes to make sure you stay silent. They've been watching you, Linda. And now, you've crossed the line. You need to stop digging. It's too late for you, for all of us." Linda felt the blood drain from her face. The walls felt like they were closing in even tighter, suffocating her with every word. Her hands were clammy as she gripped the phone. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "That doesn't matter," the voice replied quickly. "What matters is that you're about to make a decision that you'll regret. You think you're uncovering the truth, but you're playing right into their hands. This is not just about you anymore. It's about everyone you've ever known, everyone you've ever trusted. The people behind this, they will destroy you, and they will destroy anyone you love. If you keep going, there's no turning back." Linda's head spun. She had no idea who this man was or what he was talking about, but his words hit too close to home. Who could she trust anymore? Mark? The woman who had shown up at her door? This mysterious man? The conspiracy was sprawling, vast, and it was far too dangerous to navigate on her own. She could feel the danger surrounding her, creeping closer with every second. Before she could respond, the man spoke again, his voice colder now. "I've already seen what happens when people don't listen. And I've seen the aftermath. You don't want that. You have one chance to walk away from this, Linda. You think the truth will set you free, but it won't. It will bury you. Don't make the mistake I did." The call ended abruptly, leaving Linda with nothing but silence and a sinking feeling of dread. She stared at the phone in her hand, her mind spinning. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her breath came in ragged gasps. This wasn't just a small-time conspiracy anymore. This was something far bigger, something far more dangerous. There were people involved, powerful people, who would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. And Linda, by seeking the truth, had just made herself their target. Suddenly, a knock on her door interrupted her thoughts, sending a jolt of terror through her. She was certain now that she wasn't alone. Someone was watching her. She slowly approached the door, every instinct screaming at her to run, but she couldn't. Not now. Not when she was so close. When she opened the door, she was met with the last person she expected to see. It was Mark. His face was pale, his expression tight with worry, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of something else, guilt, maybe, or fear. But before Linda could speak, he held up a hand, stopping her. "You need to listen to me," he said urgently. "It's worse than you think. You can't keep going down this road." Linda stared at him, every muscle in her body tense with suspicion. She wanted to trust him. She needed to trust him. But the way he was looking at her, the way he was speaking, it felt like a warning, like he was trying to pull her away from something she had no choice but to confront. "You knew, didn't you?" Linda's voice trembled as she spoke, the weight of the question pressing down on her. "You knew what was happening all along. And you've been keeping it from me. Why?" Mark's eyes flickered, and for the first time, Linda saw the truth in his face. Fear. Real fear. The kind that made everything else seem insignificant. "It's not what you think, Linda," he said, his voice shaking. "You don't know the whole story. And if you keep pushing, you're going to get yourself killed." Linda's heart pounded as the realization hit her like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just about Mark. It was about something far darker. Something that had its claws deep in everything she thought she knew. She had been right all along. They were all tangled in a web of lies, and now, She was in too deep to escape. "You've been protecting me from something, haven't you?" Linda said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "But what if I don't want to be protected anymore? What if I want to see the truth for myself?" Mark's face twisted with a mix of desperation and something darker, something she couldn't quite place. "You don't understand," he whispered. "The truth isn't what you think it is. And once you know it, you'll wish you never asked." The room felt suffocating. Linda's blood ran cold as she realized that whatever was coming next, whatever decision she made, it would be a point of no return. And in that moment, she finally understood. The truth was no longer something she could choose. It was a force that would consume everything in its path. Linda stood there in the dimly lit warehouse, her heart hammering in her chest, every instinct screaming that she was walking into the lion's den. The silence was almost suffocating, broken only by the sound of her breath and the echo of her footsteps. She had no idea who to trust anymore. Mark's warnings echoed in her mind, but so did the mysterious voice on the phone. And now, standing before her, was the final piece of the puzzle. The truth, the thing she had been chasing for so long, was finally within her grasp. But with it came a price she wasn't sure she was ready to pay. As Linda crept deeper into the shadows of the warehouse, her hand instinctively reached for the small flashlight in her pocket. It was the only source of light in this vast, cavernous space. She flicked it on, the beam cutting through the dark, revealing rows of abandoned crates and long-forgotten machinery. There was something unsettling about the place, the stillness of it all, like it was waiting for something to happen. Or someone. Then, a voice cut through the quiet, sending a chill down Linda's spine. "You shouldn't have come, Linda." She froze. It was a voice she recognized, deep, cold, and tinged with a familiarity that made her stomach churn. She turned toward the sound, her hand tightening on the flashlight, and there, standing in the far corner of the room, was Mark. But he wasn't the same man she had known. The man before her was darker, colder, as if the person she had trusted was nothing more than a mask he had worn all along. "Mark," Linda whispered, her voice shaky with disbelief. "What is this? What's really going on?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a step forward, the shadows swallowing him for a moment before he emerged into the dim light. His eyes were steely, devoid of any warmth, and for the first time, Linda realized just how much she had been blind to. The man she had trusted, the man who had been by her side through everything, had been hiding something far more sinister. She had been played. "I never wanted you to get caught up in this," Mark said, his voice low and regretful. "But now it's too late." "Too late for what?" Linda asked, her pulse quickening. She couldn't believe it. Everything she had uncovered, all the pieces that had finally started to make sense, were crumbling around her in an instant. "What are you talking about?" Mark's eyes hardened, and for a moment, he looked like a man she didn't recognize. "It's bigger than you think. This isn't just about us. It's about everything. Every choice, every action, every secret, they've all led to this moment." His gaze flickered toward a large crate nearby, one that seemed oddly out of place, almost too pristine amid the dust and decay of the warehouse. Linda's heart skipped a beat as she realized something. The crate was locked, and she knew exactly what was inside. It had always been right in front of her, but she had been too focused on the wrong things to see it. "Open it," she demanded, her voice barely above a whisper, but it carried all the authority she could muster. Mark hesitated, his fingers twitching at his side, but then he nodded grimly. Without a word, he walked over to the crate, retrieving a crowbar from the side. Linda's breath caught in her throat as he pried the lock open with a strength that felt too calculated, too deliberate. She could see it now, the truth she had been chasing, the thing that had been buried all along. It was all contained in that crate, a tangled mess of files, photos, and documents. Everything was in there, everything she needed to understand. As the crate creaked open, Linda felt her stomach turn. But it wasn't the evidence she expected. What lay inside wasn't just a collection of papers. It was something far worse, a video camera. Mark's hands were trembling as he lifted it, pressing a button that activated the footage. And then Linda saw it, a video of herself. From the past week. From the moment she had first begun to investigate. She watched as her every move, every conversation, was being meticulously recorded. It wasn't just a simple case of surveillance. This was calculated. This was deliberate. Someone had been controlling the entire narrative. And the man standing before her had been playing his part the entire time. Why, Mark? Linda asked, her voice shaking with disbelief and growing rage. Why did you do this? Mark finally met her eyes, the mask of calm slipping for just a second, and in that fleeting moment, she saw something, guilt, fear, and a hint of something darker. Because you were never supposed to find out, he whispered. They would have come for you sooner or later. But now you're too deep in it and there's no way out. Linda's mind reeled as the truth hit her like a freight train. Mark wasn't just part of this web. He was the one who had woven it. He was the one who had set her up to uncover the conspiracy, knowing full well she would get too close to the truth. And now, as the pieces clicked together in her mind, Linda understood the real danger she was in. But just as she was about to speak, the door of the warehouse crashed open with a deafening bang, interrupting her thoughts. Linda turned toward the sound, her heart racing. A figure stepped into the light, casting a long shadow across the floor. It wasn't just Mark who had been watching her. There were others. More people involved. And they were here. As Linda's eyes adjusted, she saw the last person she ever expected to see, the woman who had warned her at the beginning, the one who had shown up at her door with that cryptic message. She wasn't an ally. She wasn't a bystander. She was part of it all. I told you this was bigger than you thought, Linda, the woman said, stepping forward with an eerie calmness. The truth? It's not for you to uncover. Before Linda could react, she felt something sharp press against her back. She froze. Another voice, familiar but cold, spoke from behind her. Game over. And then everything went black. When Linda woke up, the world was different. The sterile light above her flickered for a moment before she could focus on her surroundings. The warehouse was gone, replaced by a quiet, empty room, one with soft walls, a muted atmosphere, and a lingering sense of calm that she hadn't felt in days. For a moment, she didn't know where she was or how she'd gotten there. Her head throbbed, and the haze of unconsciousness clung to her thoughts like a fog. But then, everything came rushing back. The video, the crate, Mark's betrayal, and the mysterious woman, they all flooded her mind in a chaotic whirl. She sat up abruptly, trying to make sense of it all, but the pain in her head made her falter. The door creaked open, and a woman in a white coat entered, her face soft but determined. Linda immediately recognized her as one of the people who had been involved from the start, someone she thought had been a stranger, but in reality, someone who had been watching her, guiding her, controlling her every move. You're safe now, the woman said, her voice calm but with an edge of urgency. Linda narrowed her eyes, still processing the overwhelming mess of emotions and confusion. Safe, she echoed. What happened? Where's Mark? Where is she? What's going on? The woman sighed, sitting down next to her. You were right to question everything, Linda. But not everything was meant to be uncovered. Some truths are better left buried. She paused, as if weighing her next words carefully. Mark, he wasn't who you thought. But you weren't meant to find out. We tried to warn you, but you pushed forward. We had no choice but to take you in. Linda blinked, trying to process this new information, but it didn't quite add up. So, you were behind all of it? All those messages, everything? Why? Her voice trembled with a mixture of anger and confusion. The woman's gaze softened, but there was a finality to her expression that sent a shiver down Linda's spine. You were always meant to be part of something bigger, the woman said, her words cryptic. But now that you know too much, you can't go back. No one can. The weight of her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications. Linda felt a cold chill wash over her, a realization settling in her chest. There was no going back from this. The truth she had uncovered, the people she had trusted, they were all part of something so much darker than she could have ever imagined. And in the end, it didn't matter how much she knew. The game had already been decided long before she even started playing. As the woman stood up to leave, she turned to Linda with a faint smile, almost as if to reassure her. "You'll be okay. But don't try to fight this. There's no one left to protect you now. You're on your own." The door closed behind her with a soft click, and Linda was left alone with her thoughts, her mind a swirl of unanswered questions. But even in the silence, there was something stirring in the air, something she couldn't shake. A nagging feeling that this wasn't over. That somehow, somewhere, someone was watching. It was the type of feeling that never really went away, no matter how much time passed or how far she ran. Days turned into weeks, and though Linda tried to move on, the pieces of the puzzle still haunted her. The warehouse, the video, the hidden conspiracy, it all lingered in her mind, unresolved and unfinished. People came and went from her life, but no matter how much she tried to bury it, the truth kept clawing at her, rising to the surface. Every time she closed her eyes, she could still see Mark's face, cold, indifferent, and filled with secrets. And she couldn't help but wonder, had she truly escaped? Or had this entire ordeal been orchestrated for her to find only the pieces they wanted her to see? One day, as Linda sat at her desk, sorting through a routine, a familiar name flashed across the screen of her phone. It was a message. Just a simple text. "It's not over." Her breath caught in her throat, her fingers frozen midair. She stared at the words, unable to move, her mind racing. Who was it from? What did it mean? And why now, after everything she had been through? She clicked open the message. There was no answer, just a link. Hesitantly, she clicked it. The screen filled with another video, this one not of her, but of the woman who had taken her in. And as the video played, Linda's heart sank. It was a recording of the woman speaking in hushed tones, surrounded by shadows. "It's happening again," the woman's voice whispered, filled with fear. "We've underestimated her. She knows more than we thought." The screen flickered, the message cutting off abruptly. The phone went dead. Linda sat back, her pulse racing, her mind swirling with 1,000 possibilities. The mystery wasn't solved. It hadn't ended. If anything, it had only just begun. The doorbell rang.